coffee and oysters in the morning. 8 a.m.
Good morning, Vietnam.
Good morning.
What goes, Mr. Watson?
Oh,
Long
man.
time no see.
I feel like Joe Rogan right now.
Do you? Joe Rogan eating elk meat or on DMT?
I feel like I need some ivermectin in the shot with me.
Oh, jeez. Do you listen to Joe Rogan a lot? Is he on your to-do when you're podcasting?
Sure.
Sure.
Yeah. He's so divisive at this point. Like I probably shouldn't start it out like that.
That's all right. That's all right.
But I like to shake it up.
Shake it up a bit. I feel you. Well, it's good to be back and talking with you on the good old podcast here, because I feel like you were actually episode 2 of Along the Keel, back when I was living in Hawaii.
Right.
And we were speaking on a $25 mic from Amazon.
Yeah.
And I don't know if I ever told you this, but when I was recording that episode,
yeah,
there was a guy with a weed whacker.
I know.
Oh, did I tell you that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I was in my bathroom on the floor with towels tucked under the door to try and dampen the sound.
Constant evolution, right?
It's a constant evolution. Exactly.
That's so cool.
Exactly. But that's kind of why we're here talking, to kind of see. Obviously, we somewhat know the story. Well, I personally know the story because we first met at Full Keel. But then the evolution of West Passage and the new, what do we call it, Big Red for right now?
Yeah,
Big
sure.
Red,
Big
the
Red.
Chud Express.
Yeah,
maybe?
the Chud Express, or just Chud.
Or just Chud.
Yeah.
Which Chud is somewhere around here.
Yeah,
He's
Chud
over there.
Chud is my dog, but that's only the name that you have given him. His name is actually Cubs, or Cubby, but I can't help but really prefer Chud. Chud is a great name. So yeah, maybe we'll name the boat Chud.
Chud.
Yeah, but it'll be naming the boat after the dog.
After the dog.
Yeah.
Okay. Fair enough.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
Mm-hmm.
So give us a little background as to those who haven't heard the West Passage story, because you got an interesting story behind you where you're in New York, you're doing the city life thing. You're like, you know what, I'm not about it. We're going to go to San Francisco, work in some oyster farms, and then eventually come back to Rhode Island, which is now where you have West Passage. So give us the rundown there.
Okay, elevator pitch.
Yeah, there you go.
I grew up in Westchester, New York, and went to college and studied business, and got a job sort of on that trajectory out of college. Was a avid musician as well, but yeah, I was really sort of going in the direction of working in the city, and but I've always loved being outdoors and on the water, so it wasn't super obvious that was the direction I should go in. Probably could have gone in several directions, but this was a good pick. Anyway, so was on that trajectory. And
what do you think motivated you to kind of follow and do the business corporate type mentality?
I'm not sure. I think growing up in the environment that I grew up in, it was just I hadn't really considered doing anything other than working in an office or being a musician. I had tried being a musician, and I had tried working in an office, and I could tell right off the bat that working in an office wasn't working for me.
There you go.
Yeah. And so I ended up going out to California during. I had the job in New York, and I ended up leaving, not really by choice. I sort of got laid off from a startup that I was working for while I was out in California. And while I was out in California, you know, I had no reason to come back. Yeah, at that point I was like, well, I'm on vacation out here.
Right.
I was sort of on vacation. I was young. I was, you know, mid-20s. I was, yeah, probably like 24, 25.
Yep.
And at that point I was like, there was really nothing drawing me back except for family, but
Sure.
I was on an adventure, and so it turned out to be a close to 5-year adventure. And
That's a long vacation.
Yeah, because
Well, not really, but you know.
Yeah, but I ended up getting a job over. I had a lot of odd jobs out in California, like carpentry and just random odd jobs.
What is the oddest job you say you'd had out in California?
The oddest job?
The oddest of the odd.
Yeah, I was doing a lot. I was doing a lot of things. I was doing a lot of things. Standing out on the side of a house, putting up siding on a house, really like not in a safe way, but just trying to impress people and like trying to get hired, and also trying to like find out what I was good at, and because I like I said, I had spent so much time trying to be a musician and trying to make corporate life my life, and I wasn't really. I was good at being a musician, but it's hard to be it's hard to make a living at being a musician.
That's something I didn't really know about you, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
And when you say musician, what was your?
I'm a drummer. That's what I'm educated in. I'm a drummer, but I'm musical. So I'm musical. I can play guitar and bass decently. I'm not educated in those instruments, but
sure.
I'm educated as a drummer. I know what I'm doing, and so that was sort of my first life. Was being in a band and sort of pursuing that as a drummer.
Sure.
And then, but that wasn't paying the bills, so I went into corporate, like so many people do.
Right.
Just go into working for a startup or. That's my first job was actually an intern at Universal Records, and then
interesting.
Sort of that moved into a couple different startups, and anyway, did it for a year or two, maybe close to 3 years, and then I went to California, and I ended up getting a job over at Hog Island Oyster Farm.
Sure.
Because I had all these odd jobs, and my girlfriend at the time, now my wife, was sort of wondering what I was doing exactly with all these odd jobs.
Was she like, Graham, we gotta pick something, or
kind of, yeah, and I needed that. I actually really needed that. I'm not sure, looking back on it, I'm not sure where I would be had she not sort of helped me narrow it down. But what had happened was over the years, during that whole phase of my life, I had in the back of my mind, I had read an article about Rhode Island oyster farmers that were sustainably producing food for the local restaurants,
right.
that were growing oysters. And up until reading that article around probably my senior year of college, prior to that I hadn't my image of what oysters were like, my dad would get them when we went out to dinner, and it was something that I thought was a little like really foreign, and food. I liked pizza, and pizza's always going to be my favorite food. But yeah, it's sort of an adventurous food that like dads would eat at bars,
Right.
And that still is. I still actually love that image because I think that's sort of a charming thing for oysters to be, but they're growing in popularity now. Like, people are so adventurous. Anyway, so I had read an article about sort of senior year of college that was talking about how beneficial they are for the ecosystem and how sustainable they are, and it's just a net benefit for the environment. To produce to farm oysters.
Sure. Yeah, it's one of those. I mean, when you take agriculture as a whole and you kind of generalize it, there's a lot of things that they're not exactly positive, right? I mean, from water consumption to the overuse of our land, what it takes just from a money standpoint to produce food. But with oysters, man, you just kind of throw all that away.
Yeah.
And there's just so much net positive, which we've talked about so many times out on the water.
Yeah.
It's like, why can't we produce more oysters in a way that everyone's eating them? Because it's a great protein source too.
Yes. There's so much nutrients, and by nutrients I mean organic phytoplankton that's in the water.
Mm-hmm.
Too much nutrients in the water is a bad thing,
Right.
which causes harmful algae blooms like red tide and rust tide.
Yep.
There's so much nutrients in the water, especially in bays like Narragansett Bay, so far out offshore into the ocean, you don't really find it because it's deeper water, it's colder water.
Mm-hmm.
But in bays, there's so much phytoplankton, and so that's the benefit. That's what oysters eat. They filter phytoplankton that's in the water, and that's what they consume. And so we're not feeding them anything. It's not like other types of aquaculture that sort of get a bad rap and are still evolving practices.
Mm-hmm.
We don't have to feed our animals anything. They're just grazing off of what's
They're
already
doing their
there.
thing.
You know, it's like cows grazing, cows grazing off of the grass.
Right.
And that phytoplankton is in abundance. We don't have to use any fresh water.
Mm-hmm.
So it's all salt water, and
Salt water is better than fresh anyway.
Salt
right?
water, yeah, for oysters, it sure is. So we're not using any fresh water like in traditional agriculture, and there's no fertilizers. So really, there's very little inputs in terms of what you have to put into the system to create protein.
Right.
We don't have to do anything but put gas in the boat, and there's a lot of labor that goes, it's human labor that goes in. We're out there working our butts off, but yeah, we're not consuming a resource. We're planting the oysters day one, and then after a few years, we come back and retrieve those same oysters. So,
right.
So we like an agricultural farm, we own the seed. The seed meaning the baby oysters.
And not for nothing, but like not only does it create, is there not a lot of input? I mean, there's some carbon emissions with like obviously your motor and fossil fuels and whatnot, but you're not going to get around that nowadays. It's just part of who we are as humans. But to kind of go on top of what you're doing in terms of a net positive, not only are you going and planting more oysters, but you're also, the oysters that are, the spat that gets kind of spewed out there is going out and they're planting natural oysters and creating more reefs and ecosystems just in and around the farm.
Yeah. Yes. Under the right circumstances, you can, by the oysters that those oysters will spawn in the springtime. And ideally, under the right circumstances, it doesn't happen every season, but you do have to have, and that's why oyster reefs are so hard to come by now, like natural oyster reefs, because it's so hard for them to reproduce in the wild.
Right.
And they've been so the reefs have been so overharvested over the past 100 years that, due to pollution and due to overharvesting, humans have just eaten through the natural resource of the natural oysters that that are out in the wild.
Getting attacked right now. It's all right.
Yeah, you're getting attacked by a bear.
Oh, he's a big bear.
I hope you're getting that panting in the microphone.
Oh, it's great. We're going to leave it in there.
Yeah, he's got some good
He has
panting.
some things to say.
Yeah, what do you want to say, buddy? But the last thing I was going to say, you sort of touched on it, was that there's so much carbon, and we're concerned about that in the oceans. And oysters, that's just another thing that they do. That they help with carbon sequestration by taking that carbon out of the water,
right,
and using it to build their shell.
So on the whole, oysters are a win-win-win. It's hard to argue that.
Yes, such a win.
Right.
Yeah,
I think the only thing, playing devil's advocate, which I think a lot of people who live on the coast, some people don't necessarily agree with having visible farms.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And that's kind of always, we're kind of playing that, the idea that part of the public trust doctrine, which is outlined that all people have the right to access the ocean, right? And it goes back to like a Hugo Grotius, who's a philosopher, freedom of the seas, blah, 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 blah. And, the public trust doctrine is very similar to having a national park, right? Everyone deserves to go outside. Everyone deserves to be out in the outdoors, enjoying it. But we also have to pay for it, right?
Yeah.
So, fortunately, guys like you who are out there are in part creating an economy around it, right? And that's something that just needs to happen. So, on the other hand, some people don't want to look at it,
right?
Which is always the hard part.
Yeah.
But my thing is, like, would you rather look at a big refinery or an oyster farm?
Right.
You know what I mean? I mean, those are two separate things. But, I mean, in some ways, like, there always has to be some sort of economic benefit for that thing to stay pristine and clean and for us to be able to access it. So with an oyster farm, I mean, shit, if I have to go and look at you going out there and farming on a beautiful, bright, sunny day on the water, I don't see the issue personally.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. Everything is a trade-off. Everything you have to pay for with a cost. And the cost with oyster farming is that especially with we have a floating oyster farm, so it's very. I don't want to say it's very visible, but it's visible from shore. It's 500 feet offshore from Chaffee Nature Preserve, and we don't have the benefit that we have is that we don't have houses that are along our shoreline.
Right.
So we have hikers that'll come out and wonder, what are those floating cages that are out there, but we don't have multi-million-dollar houses along the shore that people are waking up, drinking their coffee, and looking at us oyster farming. We don't have that, so that we're lucky. Just sort of happened by random luck.
Sure.
I mean, I picked the location partly for that reason, I guess, but that's also like why I picked that location. That's there it goes.
Tactical difficulties. Chud has intruded on the podcast studio.
Let's see how many times that happens. Chubbs. I hope that doesn't.
Chubbs is now his name?
Cubs, Chubbs, Chud.
Well, he has probably half a dozen names.
Yeah. The one syllable that starts with C and sort of has a sound is all that's his name.
So you picked this oyster farm, but I think we're kind of missing this lead up where, man, he just goes where he wants, huh?
Yeah, he sure does.
Yeah. Yep.
What are you missing in the lead up?
Well, you're out and you're working for Hog Island, right?
Yeah.
And I think you bring up this really interesting concept, which not a lot of people touch on, or maybe they do, but it's the idea of going around and doing a lot of different things to then understand what you actually want to do, right? And when you're at that age of like being 20, 25, mid-20s, somewhat like where Tyler and I are at, it's, I think, super important to go and try things and do those odd jobs and kind of meander around and not get so locked into one thing before all of a sudden you look back and you're like, wow, man, life kind of sucks right now.
For sure.
For
sure.
So what do you think, like when someone asks, how did you figure out becoming an oyster farmer?
Yeah. Well,
there's this whole, I was a carpenter for a bit, and then I tried doing this. And then all of a sudden you look back and you're able to take the new boat that you just bought and, well, new to you, and refurbish it and clean it up and do all these things because you had that base knowledge, that foundation.
Yeah. What happened was I was doing carpentry. I was trying mechanics. I was working with an older gentleman who is still one of my good friends out in California, working on old motorcycles. I had a real genuine interest in tinkering, in motorcycle mechanics or car mechanics, and I was trying out carpentry. And I think that if I had pursued any of those trades, I could have learned them and done fine in them. But I think what happened was, well, the motorcycle mechanic, he sort of told me, you don't really have a knack for this. This isn't what you have a knack for. You can learn it. You could go to school, or you could apprentice and stuff, and you could learn it. But you don't particularly. I find that, like, I know a little bit about a lot of things.
Yeah.
And I kind of I like that about myself. But if you're a mechanic, you got to know very specific about mechanics.
Sure.
But I think what happened was I went to Hog Island and I took the job because the Hog Island Oyster Farm out there in San Francisco. I took the job because, first of all, just being outside, I really love being outside. I had sort of narrowed that down with the carpentry. I knew I didn't want to take carpentry jobs that were inside.
Mm-hmm.
Again, I'm not trying to say I was a carpenter. I came nowhere close to being a carpenter, but I was a laborer with other carpenters. But I knew that I liked the jobs that were outside. So I narrowed that down. And then I also knew, and I always knew this, that I was a lover of the water and like a real lover of the water. And I never thought about it as being an option for working on the water.
Right.
I just, like, what a dream! Like, what that's too crazy to even consider that. But yet I just lucked out. I lucked out because I figured out that, okay, I like to work outside. I love to be on the water. There's something about being so comfortable on the water. I spent so much time on the water as a kid. I was, like, from a young age, I was in the pool. Like, I was always underwater. I was always, like, swimming, and I was always, like, I just loved being underwater. I would hold my breath and sit underwater for minutes at a time. I don't know. It's just and other people in my family are not comfortable in the water. They want to be far away from the ocean. They want to be, because they're scared of it. And I've got a natural fear of the water too, but I've always been so comfortable around water and being in it.
Right.
So I think that sort of just steered me in that direction. I guess I just naturally sort of went that direction. So I got the job at Hog Island, and I found and I did a lot of things. I delivered the oysters, and I was a delivery guy. I was an oyster shucker at the restaurant, and I bounced around through farm jobs too. So I would work on the farm, a couple days, and I would do the other jobs as well. And they were so friendly to that. They were so friendly in letting me do that.
Right.
So I owe a lot to their flexibility with me. And so I was really lucky in that way. I got to learn this industry or this business from a company that, like, really cares about the industry and the business. They really do. So I think that was just luck. That was just dumb luck. I could have worked for another oyster farm or an aquaculture or working on the water in another capacity where I wouldn't have learned from such passionate people.
Right.
They are just so passionate about keeping the ocean clean and producing sustainable seafood.
Yep.
And doing it in a they're passionate marine biologists. So
yeah.
They really want to do good things in the world.
Yeah. Well, and that's kind of the telltale when it comes to, I think, creating a company, having a brand, whatever that is, right? Is being able to pass that knowledge and that passion down to someone versus just a product, right? Because in a way, they kind of created and helped forge Graham, right? And then Graham can now go out and make his impact here in Narragansett Bay with West Passage oysters. And then who knows, maybe some guy that you have on the farm all of a sudden down the road goes and has an oyster farm in Texas or whatever, right? It's like that generational type mentality, I think, is so strong on the water. And it doesn't seem like there's a lot of that in other industries. It seems like working on the water is almost like this lineage that gets passed down, right? Like my grandfather was a commercial fisherman out of Gloucester. My dad fished with him when he was growing up. I'm a captain. You're working on an oyster farm. Like there's this innate kind of, hey, let's keep this going, right?
Yeah.
And in a lot of ways, it's romanticized, but it's hard work. And at the same time, you're outside and you're having fun.
Yeah, sort of legacy. It's a that sort of happens with generations. The legacy of working on the water.
Right.
And I'd like to see that happen with me and my kids, and I see that happen with Hog Island, and they're it's getting passed down to their newer generations too.
Right.
And that that's something that I guess that's just natural. I mean, I want to share this with as many people as I can because if you love working on the water, it's such a great thing, and it's an expanding industry too. I mean, like you were just pointing out, somebody might go down and start an oyster farm in Texas. The oyster farms are popping up everywhere, and so that's because people are getting more adventurous in eating, and people are caring more about where their food comes from. It's not so. I worked for Hog Island, and then I started the farm in 2017. There's a couple people actually that are doing the similar thing. North Sea Oysters down in North Carolina.
Okay.
I think they're called North Sea Oysters. They sort of did a similar thing. The guy worked for Hog Island and
then went down to North Carolina. And
a
did
period
that.
of time.
Yeah.
And went back to I think his home state of. I don't know where he's originally from, but either way, he sort of took his knowledge and brought it elsewhere.
Right.
And you could, so yeah, it's a beautiful thing, and it's a good industry to get into, and I can be really proud of the product that we're producing.
Yeah.
I really wanted to start my own business. And I always had that in mind going through the years, starting with the corporate job and saving my money, trying to save my money as a laborer, and it's hard to save money, when you've got those kinds of jobs. But I always had in the back of my mind that I was saving for something.
Why is that? Why do you think that you were motivated to? Rather than, go, I want to make my 401k really big, or I want to do this. It was, you know what, I want to save for a business, or I want to try and do something down the road. I don't know what it's going to be.
I don't know.
But it's going to be something.
I think some people are motivated to sort of do something that's outside of the box, I guess. I can only speak for myself. I wanted to not. I didn't want to work for somebody and do something for them that I didn't think was worthwhile. So I didn't have any, what do you call it, skin in the game. I like when I was working for startups in New York City. I don't know if they're still around. Maybe they are. I just didn't have anything invested. I didn't care. I really didn't. I really didn't care. And some people do. Some people do care about the company that they work for.
Right.
I just happened to. I didn't care about what they were doing.
Yeah.
Hog Island, I did care about what they were doing, but I guess I still, and they were a great employer. They were a great place to work, great community. But I still had this feeling like I wanted to do my own thing. And I'm telling you, when I wake up in the morning, I'm working, and when I go to sleep, like right before I go to sleep, I'm doing something and I'm working. Right now, technically, I'm working. You know what I mean? But it's hard to tell.
Right.
It's hard to tell when I'm working. It's hard to tell when I'm not working. I'm working on the boat today.
Right.
Before you came over, sort of tinkering around with the boat, getting it ready for this season. I'm talking to you. I'm gonna shuck oysters. We're gonna eat oysters, and I get.
Sounds like it's just absolutely horrible work environment.
Well, so that that's all I'm getting at is like it sounds so cliche because everyone says it, but that old adage, do what you love and you won't work a day in your life. That's I hate to be so cliche, but that's accurate.
Yeah.
Like I get to buy a boat, and that's a business expense.
Right.
You know, I get to.
It's a write-off.
It's a write-off.
The government pays for it.
How is that a write-off? I mean, I'm not lying. I use that on the oyster farm. You know, we're going to be using that 90% of the time for the oyster farm. But I don't know. It's like how could I get paid? I'm not getting paid. You know, like in essence, I'm doing the things that I really would want to be doing anyway. I get to put on a wetsuit and jump in the water and and go underwater and look at stuff underwater. And I'm technically working. I get to go scuba diving and I'm technically working.
I'll be fishing every once in a while.
That I can't. If the IRS were to ask me, that doesn't count. I'll be fishing is on my own time.
Gotcha. I gotcha.
So like fishing rods. Though I wish that those. I love fishing. That I can't really write that kind of stuff off.
All right. I can see that. So as you kind of grew this oyster farm, and that's kind of how we met. It was you were just starting off. The guys over at Pleasant Street were like, "Hey, you should go, meet up, right?" And we kind of like exchanged info because at the time I was trying to get my permit, went a different route, but just was like, "Hey, we should always stay in touch." So it's been like how many years now? 4 or 5, something like that.
Yeah, that was probably 2018. 2017 or 2018.
Yeah.
Actually, it might have been a little. I think it was 2017.
Probably, right? So, 4 or 5, almost 5 years ago.
Yep.
Jesus.
Yeah.
Time flies.
Yes.
And you didn't even have it. You had you just had your the small boat.
At that point, I didn't even have a boat.
You didn't even have a farm.
I didn't have a farm and I didn't have a boat. I didn't have any of the things.
So as you you landed in Rhode Island, and you were going through the paces of, I don't have a boat, I don't have a farm. I just met this guy named Zach who probably seems like an idiot, but we might keep him around.
No, you seemed smarter than me.
That's definitely not true. But
well, I don't know if it's true, but we've both got our the things that we're good at. I wouldn't be good at any of the stuff that you can do.
But that's why we're here.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So as you made those steps to get an oyster farm, were there any times in that process, because obviously now you love what you do, it's easy to see that passion, where you're thinking to yourself, man, what did I get myself into?
Were there any points?
Yeah.
Yeah, again, it's like it's an obvious answer, but the pandemic was that moment. Yeah. And that was the worst.
That was not a good time.
That was a terrible time.
And now that we've kind of come out of the pandemic,
the
feeling of being back in the saddle, like growing this, farm, because compared to when you started, you only had 3 acres, right?
Yeah.
And now we're
up to 6.
Now we're up to 6. How many cages?
350, I think. 350 cages out there.
And that means what in terms of production?
How many oysters are out there? There's probably like I think there's 2 million, about 2 million. But last year we sold about 500,000, and I think this year I'm really hoping to get closer to 1 million. But it's farming, so it's like Mother Nature dictates sort of what happens a little bit.
Right.
But I'm hoping production-wise to increase every year.
And then what does that look like? Like when you say increased production, does it mean I'm throwing more cages out there? Because, like you said, Mother Nature has this kind of way of, kind of dealing the cards to some extent. They're kind of playing against the house.
Yeah.
What are
Yeah.
What is it that you're doing to keep the farm growing?
Every year, the gear costs a lot of money. So I started out with 50 cages, I think, the first year, and then put out another 50, and sort of grows in increments of 50 cages at a time, it feels like.
Yeah.
So, you can only grow so many oysters in 50 cages, you know. Each cage, you could put in about 1,000 oysters. So every cage you put out, you can grow more and more and more. So anyway, if you do the math, like there's a bunch of oysters out there that are baby oysters that they don't take up as much space. So we can cram a lot more than 1,000 oysters in each bag. Either way, that's what we're doing. We're investing in more cages every year, and that's helping us grow bigger. We're probably not gonna ever be a hog island. it's not really. That's probably not what we're aiming to do. There's on the East Coast versus the West Coast. It's like the East Coast. There are a lot of little oyster farms.
Sure.
There's a bunch in Rhode Island. There's like 20.
Yeah, it's been wild. Like since when you first started.
Yeah.
I feel like you were one of, I don't know, maybe half a dozen, you know?
Probably more. It was probably like, I don't know. There was probably 15 or so.
Yeah.
And I think it's probably grown a bunch. It's definitely, more farms have popped up in Rhode Island in the past 5 years. Not just me. And, yeah. Where was I?
No, I think it's continuing the evolution, right?
But it's always going to be a small. My point was, it's always going to be sort of a smaller little oyster farm. You know.
Sure.
I mean, it might evolve into something else, and go in different directions. But
yeah,
it's on the West Coast. There's a few sort of like big productions.
Yeah.
Hog Island is a big production. They weren't always. They started in the 80s, but they've turned out 3 or 4 restaurants.
Yeah, I remember going to one.
Yeah.
On, what's the Pier 39? Pier something? In San Fran, downtown?
It's on the Embarcadero in San Francisco.
Yeah.
I forget which pier that is.
Yep.
Yeah, they've got several. And
Yeah.
And there's a few oyster farms out there. They've done really well with that. They've done and so they've vertically integrated. They've got oyster farm plus their restaurants, plus they just started a hatchery up in very northern California where they grow they grow the oysters from larvae and get them to the stage that we buy them as farmers. We get them, when they're a few millimeters.
So they're trying to really develop the full cycle here.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is awesome.
Yeah.
That's really cool. So you bought this new boat.
Mm-hmm.
That's part of the evolution.
Yeah.
Because before we had, what was it? I always forget the name. The guy builds them in Coventry.
Oh, the Midland.
The Midland.
Yeah,
right?
the Midland. I have a Midland. Yeah.
You still have the Midland, but you purchased this, a couple weeks ago?
Yeah, a couple weeks ago.
So tell us more about this boat.
This is a 24-foot privateer, and I'm really happy with it so far.
Now, since it's a privateer, are you considered a privateer now? Like, will you be pillaging other boats?
What is a privateer? Does that mean like a pirate?
It's a pirate, but like sanctioned by the government.
Oh, cool.
So you're like a mercenary pirate.
Oh, you know what? It's made by Privateer. The name of the model is Renegade, actually. Privateer Renegade, even cooler.
Even cooler. It makes perfect sense, too.
Privateer Renegade. These boats are made down in I believe it's North Carolina, somewhere in that region.
That would make sense.
Yeah. I've been looking for a second boat for a couple of years now.
Mm-hmm.
And this one fits the bill. I don't know if it's if it's going to be long term or not. But I said the same thing with the Midland too. When I first bought that boat, it was just a hull and needed a lot of work, and I was like, "Oh, a stepping stone boat, and we'll evolve into a different boat." But that boat now, we've built it to what it is.
You got a house on it. It looks great.
Yeah, it's got a kitchen, 2 bedrooms. No, I'm just kidding. No, it's evolved into the perfect. That other boat has evolved into the perfect farm boat. So now that boat is perfect for being a farm boat. But we do a lot of oyster tours. We bring people out and we show them the farm, and we shuck oysters. We eat oysters out on the farm, and people love learning about aquaculture and how the whole process works. And actually seeing it up close really helps because just talking about it is kind of hard to see it. But anyway, so we do a lot of farm tours, and we were looking for a bigger boat for that, and also just having the ability to have a second. I mean,
having another boat is always going to be a good thing.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, when maintenance needs to get done on that boat, this boat can be fit in if we need it to.
Now, when you say fit the bill, what were you looking for? Like, what? I guess the question would be, what makes a good oyster farm boat?
A lot of people do a lot of so. All oyster farms look different. The oyster farm that we have, like I said, is a floating farm. It's got long lines that you don't want to get wrapped up in. So an ideal farm boat for us is it has an outboard, a motor that you can lift up just in case you get caught up, your propeller gets caught up in the lines. People use inboards too, but I didn't want to. I love inboards. I think they're super cool, but I really wanted the ability to lift the motor. Because if you have an inboard and you get wrapped up in
you're diving on that thing.
Yeah. And it can be done, but in February it's scary. So yeah, I wanted something. I wanted an outboard. I wanted it to be 24, 25 feet. Something that we can trailer ourselves and not have to rely on somebody else to pick us up out of the water.
Yep.
Because once you get past 25, 26 feet, you can't really trailer a boat that size. So we wanted a boat that size. I wanted a cabin on it. It can get in the way for farming, the cabin. In some ways it can get in the way. In other ways it comes in handy. So I wanted a second boat that wasn't going to be a duplicate of the one we already had. I wanted a second boat that could do the stuff that the first boat can't do. So I wanted the cabin for giving tours. People are more comfortable. It also gives us the ability to bring more stuff out, stuff that we need to keep dry. So it has a
V berth up up forward.
Forward.
It's a great boat. I mean, you got a ton of deck space, a little pilot house there with an open, aft cabin. Like it's an awesome boat. Yeah. Good shine to it too, so I'm sure it runs pretty well in the water.
I also wanted something that was already sort of beat up a little bit. I felt bad getting a nice boat that somebody had taken really good care of, and we were just gonna beat
the living crap out of it.
Yeah, I don't know. I just felt like this one fits the bill.
Well, and you can make it your own too.
Yeah,
that's kind of the thing.
Exactly. Any boat you get for oyster farming, you gotta always consider, like, you're gonna have to make it what you need, And that goes with fishing too. This is set up. This was, as of a few weeks ago, was set up for tuna fishing,
which blows my mind.
Yeah. And we had to raise the roof. I had to take a whole bunch of stuff off of there. This thing was set up for tuna fishing.
I'm excited. It'll be good to get out on it and try it out and see how it performs on the farm. But I think what you mentioned there was your addition to the tours, which I know you've done in the past. And what it boils, man, Chud is just he's doing his thing. He does not have a care in the world, that dog.
He's so happy.
Yeah, he's just a happy dog.
He just wants to, be a part of the mix.
Hey,
I love how he sticks his feet out in the back.
It's like a frog. It's frogging.
Frog legs, yeah. I looked it up the other night. They call it in dog world, they call it the sploot.
The sploot.
Yeah. He's splooting when a dog puts their legs out back.
I get that. I can see that.
It's the cutest thing I've ever seen.
Chud, cub, sploot, all those. But kind of going, it seems like there's this theme in your whole oyster farm journey, life, all that wrapped up into one package of getting some information passed down to you and then continuing passing that down, right? And with the addition of the farm tours and like us always going around and communicating, taking me on the farm, and you've always been someone that's super open to sharing what you've done, right? And especially when it comes to oyster farms. And I think in some ways other industries are a little bit more, their lips are kind of sealed, right?
Yeah.
Whereas with what you're doing, and I think in a lot of ways, most of the marine industry, they're a little bit more open. Like if you're willing to put in the time and you're willing to learn and take some criticism here and there, like people are going to open their arms to you.
Yeah.
And I think doing the farm tours is just that step to really open someone's eyes to what aquaculture is.
Yes. Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. Actually, that's an important piece for me, and it's an important piece. In my experience, I went in when I was in the corporate life. Is like what I say to you, don't say to that other person, because it's not going to be good if you say it. And it was all these secrets and. I'm not saying that like all corporate life is like that, but in my experience, I worked at places that like you weren't. There was things that you could say and you can't say, and you gotta make sure what you say is, sounds good or something in front of the right people, and trying to impress certain people. And I wasn't good at that. I can't be anybody than who I am. And I don't want to be.
Right.
I never wanted to be. So like I didn't do well in corporate life because of that. But when I started researching the oyster farm, so after my experience at Hog Island, I came back and I started reaching out to East Coast oyster farmers that I just researched in New York. I'm from New York, so I was researching Long Island oyster farms. Shout out to Lucky 13 Oyster Farm. He's Matt. I forget his last name, but Matt is the owner, and he makes amazing. He grows amazing oysters out there, and he was one of the first people that was really. I emailed him and I called him a couple times, and I just said, like, I'm interested in oyster farming. I'm coming from the West Coast, and I have experience oyster farming on the West Coast, but I just want to pick your brain, and I'm looking to start my own oyster farm. And like under certain circumstances, somebody could easily just be like, I don't have time for that. I don't want them competing with me, but he was really helpful. I showed up to and I met him at a diner in Long Island, and he just sat down and told me what he had learned over the years. And he had only been in it for four years or so at his stage. Now he's been in it for close to a decade. But so he brought me out to his farm after that and showed me how he has it all set up. Said, this is what you don't want to do. This is what you do want to do. If you do this, you're going to be in trouble. If you do this, you're going to save yourself a lot of headache. And that experience with him was my experience with every oyster farmer that I talked to. I mean, I really can't say a bad thing about any oyster farmer. I mean, and then I worked for Dutch. Shout out to Dutch Island Oyster Farm. He took me under his wing essentially. He's just south of the Jamestown Bridge. He taught me so much, and we still bounce ideas around off of each other. Perry down at Matunic, he taught me a lot about oyster farming. I mean, for me, what I need to do is I need to do a lot of research before I can commit to an idea, and I've always been that way. And so I did my research for 4 years on the West Coast, and I did my research for like a year or a year and change with Dutch Island and Matunic. And then at that point, when I was here in Rhode Island, when I met you, I had a year and a half or so to wait for my application to actually get approved anyway.
Right.
So I was just working for oyster farms in Rhode Island.
Yep.
So I really narrowed down what is it like to work in Rhode Island in February on the water. It's a lot different than it is in San Francisco.
Right.
And I wanted, so I utilized that time that it took to
gain experience and build that out. And it's a lot of process, right?
Yeah.
And figuring out what works and what doesn't, and it's not going to take 2 days to get there, right? It's going to take 2 years or 2 decades to get there. So if you're someone that is been doing what you're doing and you find someone that's just getting started, and what's the first thing you say to them?
If they're asking, I mean, it depends on what they ask me. I would say,
hey, Graham, I want to get into oyster farming.
I would say it's a great idea.
It's a great idea, and the process is going to be X, Y, Z.
The process is going to start with, look, if you want to get into anything, if you want to open a bookstore, if you want to start an oyster farm, I think you got to work for a bookstore or work for an oyster farm. Otherwise, how are you going to know what it's like to do it?
Right.
And so that's what I say to people. I say that to everybody.
Yeah. Yeah, and it seems like you got to, in order to do that, you got to go out and provide value to someone that's in the industry. Not always be that taker. You've given so much to Hog Island and Dutch and all these other guys that have been out there that it was of course we're going to help you out, Graham. you've been helping us out the whole way.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, those are just like things that I live by, though. Like, just be a nice, good, try and be a helpful person to people.
Yeah.
Try not to piss anybody off. I don't make enemies. I try and just be a nice person, and because like there's nothing better than having friends, you know.
Right.
There's nothing better. I mean, all of these oyster farmers that we're out on the water and we help each other.
Mm-hmm.
And like we bounce, like I said, we're bouncing ideas off each other. I don't know. I wouldn't say be a nice person to somebody because that's not specific to oysters, but it helps, you know.
It helps.
But anyway, I don't know. I guess if somebody were to ask me like what should I do, I would say you gotta narrow down. First of all, I'd say put in your application put in your application to get a lease.
Mm-hmm.
Well, look, I would say where do you want to do the oyster farm? Because it could be in New York or Virginia or Texas or California or up here in Rhode Island or Maine or Canada. It could be anywhere. You got to know where you want to farm the oysters because you can farm oysters pretty much anywhere.
Right.
It's got to be clean water. You know, you don't want to farm oysters in New York Harbor. But so it's got to be clean. Anyway, so I would say there's three things. The location of the farm is important. The boat is important, and the type of gear that you're using to farm the oysters is important. But all those three things have to marry with each other. So, like, you ask, like, what's the best farm boat for oyster farming? This is only specifically. This is our oyster farm
Right.
boat.
Floating cages.
Yeah.
That's the tool you want to use.
But it wouldn't be a good farm boat for every oyster farm because every oyster farm really is different. Some oyster farms aren't floating oyster farms.
Right.
Some of them are on the bottom of the ocean. And so so those three things you gotta know those three important things if you're actually serious about doing an oyster farm. But even before that. That would only be something I would say to somebody that was like sure they wanted to start an oyster farm. Those three things are really important. But before that, I would say like work for a few different oyster farms so you know what it looks like and figure out if you like working on the water because not everyone does.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Graham, you know, it's been great being able to touch base as always, get out on the farm, hang out, shuck a few oysters. So if someone wants to get in touch with you to learn about oyster farming or wants to go on the farm tour or check you out, where can they go?
They could go to westpassageoysters.com, and that's our website. And we're on Instagram at West Passage Oyster Co.
All right.
Yeah.
That's it. That's the thing. Cool. All right, Graham. Well, hey, thanks for coming on again.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me. I feel so lucky to be here.
Right on. All right. I think Chud is into something.